Okay, in this video I'm going to show you how to machine stitch, apply our binding, which I provide in the packs, onto our quilt. Now, so I'm using a different quilt top because the yellow one that we've been working on in all the other videos, I've hand stitched that one, but this is showing you how to machine stitch one on. I personally will machine stitch the front on and then hand bind the back, and that's the process I personally use. There are other ways of doing it where you can do it all in one go, but I feel it doesn't give quite such a, I suppose, polished finish. So your binding comes, that I provide, it's a 2.5 inch binding, and it comes folded and pressed like so. So you've got what, 1.25 inches there. Okay, so you've got an open side to it and you've got the closed side. What we're going to do is, and there's enough binding there to go all the way around plus an extra side, but you need that extra to be able to do the join. Okay, so what we do is we turn it, have our basting, so the open edge of our open edge of our binding, okay, is along the outside edge of our quilt. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave, that's probably a good kind of like 4 inches that I'm not going to stitch to start off with. So I'm starting, there's about 3-4 inches on the bottom left hand corner of my quilt. I'm actually going to start sewing about here. Okay, so it's the open edge is lined up with the edge of my quilt, so you can see that there. Okay, and then there's the backing. Okay, so, and I'm going to stitch this in a grey so that you can see what I've actually done. This is probably one of the only occasions I would probably be more likely to have something possibly more neutral, but I'm also aware that whatever's happening in here is going to affect which thread I use. So if I've got lots of colours going on here, which usually my designs do have, then just sticking with a neutral grey is fine. So I'm going to start here. Okay, again, as I mentioned in the previous video, I would normally do this with a walking foot. However, I am making assumptions that people don't have walking feet set up on their machine. So I'm going to show you how I do it carefully with the sewing machine. So if you are at all unsure, you can put a couple of pins in there just to hold it initially in place. One of my pins. So I'm just going to pin that through there. That's just holding it in place for the start point. Okay, so let me move my machine back over. Okay, I'm going to up the tension lower the tension a wee bit more. Okay, just because I've got more fabric going through here now than I did before. Okay, now I'm going to start off, okay, by putting my foot down. I'm going to pull that pin out because that was just enough just to hold it there for now. If you're a bit nervous, you can have more pins in further down here. Now let me zoom it in so you can see what's going on here. Okay, so so I've got the open end of my binding up against, lined up with my outside edge of my quilt panel, my sampler. Now I'm going to put my needle down, so you can either do that with by yourself, or if your machine does it, you can put that down. Okay, and that just makes sure that it's held in place. And I've got it's about 1/4 inch. I'm going to do a straight line down there from the edge. I'm actually using the edge of my foot, so it's probably about 7-8 mil. I should measure it, but it's the width of my foot. Okay, so that will act as my guide for the edge of my binding. Now I'm just going to do a couple of stitches backwards, just a couple, okay. I'm probably going to bring my stitch size back down again, maybe to about 2.6, and then I'm just going to just slowly feed this through. There's no reason to take this too fast. Okay, now can you see I've got to the point where I'm going to put in a mitered edge, okay? So whatever my distance is between my needle and the outside edge of my foot is now the same distance from the needle to this outside edge of my foot, of the binding, okay, or the panel, okay. So basically it's kind of making a little square in that area. I don't know if I can zoom in more. A wee bit more. There we go. So I've got probably what, 7mm going from there to there and 7mm going from there to there ish, okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my needle down, okay, and I'm going to lift my foot so that I can rotate my quilt top round. Now I've just lifted that up and I can see that actually I probably need to do another stitch going this way, so I'm going to take it back, put my foot back down, do one more stitch. There we go. Lift my foot. Right, now I can see I've got basically a square shape happening here, okay. And what I want to do is let me use a pointy thing. Okay, so I've got my pointy thing here. So what I'm going to do is I've now turned my panel at a 45-degree angle to the needle where I was stitching before. What I'm going to do is with my binding down, I'm going to stitch a line from where I am now to the corner edge of the quilt, okay. So if I put that down, okay, drop my feet back down, and it's just going to come off the edge there, okay. I'm going to keep my needle down still, actually, lift my foot, okay, and I've just turned my fabric back round, okay. And what I'm just going to do is I've just pulled it towards me a little bit, not too much, okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my binding away from me, so it's now got this 45-degree angle here, and I'm just finger pressing that down now, okay. So that's going straight up, so if I was to draw a line, the edge of my quilt would now be going with the edge of the binding going away from me, okay. And then holding that in place, I pull the binding back down. That finger press should be holding it in place nicely, and I fold it back towards me so that it's now back along the edge of the quilt. Okay, so if you're not sure about what was happening there, rewind the video, pause it as many times as you want. Okay, and I'm going to put my foot down. My needle is already down. I'm going to do a couple of stitches carefully because there's quite a lot of fabric in there now. Okay, just going through, make sure I'm going through all of it. Okay, and then I'm going to sew down to this edge. Okay, so I'm coming towards the corner again, where I'm going to do the mitre. Okay, so I want to have this so that finishes at a square. So just slowed right down, almost one stitch at a time, lift my foot, and I can see that that's good. I've maybe gone one stitch too far this time, but it'll be okay. So I've turned it to a 45-degree angle. I'm going to stitch off that corner and then lift my foot up, turn my quilt back towards me, So where I've got the diagonal there, I'm going to fold my binding up there, so it's back in line with this. Okay, and I'm going to pull it back down after I've finger pressed that into place there. So that edge is lined up there and this edge is lined up down here. Okay, and then I can just place it back in. My needle's already down, so I know exactly where that's going to start stitching. Slowly to start off with. And then I don't, to be honest, particularly because I've not got my walking foot on, but even with my walking foot, I do this quite slowly. I'm not trying to rush this at full speed. On my machine, as your machine may have as well, I actually have a facility to slow it down, so it doesn't, even if my foot's down full, it doesn't go at full speed, so that I can control it more. And I often don't have it set to full speed. As I get lazy and I get carried away and I just start whizzing through it, and it's when mistakes usually happen. I think one more stitch. Lift. Back in there, get those threads out of the way. Okay, so what we've got here now is, if I zoom out, wrong way, gosh, you can go in close, can't you? If I zoom out further, hopefully, excuse me, we can see I've now got the tail end, and then I've got the edge where I started. Okay, and these are going to overlap here. Okay, for now they are. Okay, now what I want to do is I'm leaving, that's kind of about maybe 5 inches between this point and this point down here. Okay, I'm just going to do a couple of back stitches personally, just so that when I'm pulling on it and moving it around, it's definitely going to hold in place. Okay, and I'm now actually going to cut my thread. Okay, just there. So I've just got this element here and this element here. And let me just cut off these little bits. Okay, right. I'm just going to pause the video and change the camera angle. Okay, and when I come back I'll show you what we do next. Okay, so for this part I'm going to show you how we're going to create a seamless join here. So we've got our two bits here, okay, with the overlap here. Now with the longer end, okay, I'm just going to cut off about an inch, okay, off there, okay. And what I'm going to do is open that up, okay, so we can know what the height is of our piece, okay. So I've got my fold there, okay. What I want to do is lay this on here so that my fold is kind of in the middle between where I've finished sewing and started sewing, so it's about here-ish, okay. And then what I'm going to do, okay, is this is the edge of it there, okay. Now, because it's the same colour as this, you maybe can't pick up on it so well, okay. But where the edge of that is where I am going to trim this end down to. So there's the edge of the piece I've just cut off. I'm just going to trim this. We're only using the bit we've just cut off is just for measuring our size here, okay. I'm going to lay that back down, and then I lay my other end down on top of it, and then where the edge of the bit that I cut down here is, which is just our template sitting on there, okay, that's where I'm going to cut the top one, not the bottom one, otherwise you won't have enough fabric. So then cut the top one at that point there. Okay. So I can now discard my ends, and also I've got the bit that I cut as a template. So now you can see we've got these two bits that cross over, and what they should do is they should cross over exactly the same amount, should be the full width of our binding, which in this case is 2.5 inches. Okay, so what do we do next? What we're going to do is we're going to open these out. Okay, this is the most awkward bit, okay, but it will look dead smart at the end, okay. We've got the right side of our fabric, so the fabric that is showing, okay, and then we've got the wrong side of the fabric, which is inside the binding, okay. So putting our two right sides together, or what I also do first of all is just pin my quilt a bit here, so it makes this next job a bit easier. So I've just pinned that, so it's just like that, okay. So I've got my two ends, okay, with the right side together, okay. I am going to cross these over like so, okay. So I've got, this one's going that way, this one is going that way, okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew a diagonal line from this point here to this point here, but just to make sure that the fabrics stay in place, okay. I'm just going to put a couple of pins in, and I also put the pins in a direction which I'm pointing to, which reminds me the bit I'm sewing, okay. So I'm going to sew down this bit here, so I've put my pins in that direction. And if you are wanting to make sure it's definitely all lined up, it is awkward, but we can put in another pin down here as well if we want to, just to make sure they're flat to each other, okay. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring the sewing machine back in, and I'm going to sew along this line here, okay. So pull the machine back in play, okay. So I've got my quilt here, okay, and I'm just going to position this, put my needle down. I'm going to do a couple of stitches forward and then a stitch or two backwards, okay, and then I'm just going to whiz straight down here, okay. Okay, you could put a couple of reverse stitches in if you want to. There we go. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is take these pins out, and what we'll see is this will all fold in on itself and we'll get this nice clean edge. But before we do that, we want to cut this triangle off here. Leaving about a quarter of an inch. Okay. We're going to take our pin out that was holding the quilt bit together. Okay, and we're just going to, with this bit here, we're going to finger press it open. Okay, now the studio is very, very cold this morning as I film this, so I have got cold hands. But hopefully they're warm enough to press that out, which they seem to be. Okay, and then what I can do is fold that back in. Okay, a little bit of a twist on this one, but I can just repress that out, just using my fingers just to ease that all in. Okay, so now we can just go back down here, line that all back up again. Okay, and we are going to stitch down to rejoin our original start line. So I'm just adjusting this to make sure it is lining up properly. Back stitch. How that was, so we started to get a little bit of buckling here. This is more to do with the kind of as I mentioned earlier on, with things moving at a slightly different rate, but it's not too bad. Once that's pressed out, we won't be able to see that. So I'm just joining up with that line, putting in a couple of back stitches, cutting that, and there we have it. So we now have our binding. So what we can see on the corners, okay, is we've got, it looks like this, but then when we push it all out to go over to the back, okay, we get these really lovely mitered corners. Okay, so just like that, and then we will hand stitch the back of this. Okay.